So, hi everyone. Paul Krugman again. I have Phillips O'Brien, who's kind of a regular on this Substack now. Um, who, for those who haven't seen my previous conversations with him, Phillips is a military historian based at St Andrews in Scotland. Although, um, as you'll tell when he starts talking, not from Scotland. And uh, really, I've been immensely uh, educated by his books long before any of this current stuff happened. Um, Real stress on, getting away from the romantic notion of wars as decided by great battles and much more on logistics and production, and which is the stuff that really matters. And he's been incredibly useful and far better than the most of the st- strategic community. I don't know what you call that on Ukraine, and now has been weighing in. And so I thought it would be good to talk after this Venezuela, whatever it was, and a bunch of related issues, including some other things he's been writing about. So hi again.
Well, thanks for having me back, Paul. I mean, the Venezuela stuff just is extraordinary. I wrote a little Substack about it this morning. Is can you have regime change without changing a regime?
Yeah,
And that seems to be what the Trump administration has done. They have gotten rid of a dictator, but left the dictatorial system almost undisturbed.
yeah.
You could even argue, in some ways, strengthened because Maduro's gone and he was the problem. The U.S. can say all it wants about we are in control, we're in control, but they're clearly not in control. And in some ways, they've reduced their ability to control the situation. So it's quite extraordinary what's happened. I don't know quite what to make of it, but I think the U.S. is going to find out again, once again, that it doesn't have the ability to control things that thinks it does.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing that um, the they got one guy, but
Yep.
it's so we're talking on Tuesday, and events might happen between now and when this goes up. But as of Tuesday, it's clearly the Chavista machine is still in fully functional. Paramilitaries are arresting journalists and protesters, and it's all business as usual, except possibly strengthened because Maduro was a good symbol and now yeah,
I think it's strengthened, and also the opposition's been weakened. I mean, Corina Machado, who was the leader of the opposition, came
yeah,
out with a really, pathetic, not in that she was pathetic, but what she said was pathetic interview yesterday, which said that she has no contact with Trump. He's basically not contacted her since she was given the Nobel Prize.
yes, it's the
She
most
gets the
amazing.
Nobel Prize. He then cuts her off. I'm not having anything to do with you. So someone who could be an opposition leader, actually represent regime change in Venezuela, is being stonewalled by the U.S. president out of pique. So the opposition's been weakened by Trump. And the regime has been strengthened because they got rid of Maduro, who was a problem for the regime. And now lesser known figures are there fighting for control. And the United States can't do this again. It's not like they can keep snatching presidents.
Yeah,
You can do it once. You can't make that a policy.
there's a real question about what actually happened. Also, this was suspiciously easy. It kind of, it not based on any direct evidence, but it has the look of a setup that basically,
Absolutely. I mean, there were the sources weren't named. There were sources that were saying the U.S. had connections in the Venezuelan government, and they clearly knew exactly where Maduro was. They knew how his security worked,
yeah,
and they were able to get in and out very quickly. I mean, and for all we know, it could have been even the sitting president or someone like that who helped. I mean, we really don't know, but all we know is that it was someone who knew, someone who understood the system, passed that along and helped the U.S. in, and that could strengthen the new regime coming in. But right now, there is no sign that anything but a Chavista government will stay in power. I mean, there will probably be fighting among the Chavistas, but it was fascinating to see the new president, Delcy Rodriguez, hugging the Russian and Chinese ambassadors.
Literally
Like,
hugging them. I mean, we're not
it
talking metaphorical here. We're yeah.
physical hug.
Yeah, I mean, I remember Iraq and the desperate attempts by the Bush administration to have a democratic opposition they could elevate. I mean, they that there really wasn't one, and they invented this. It was this guy Shalabi, if anybody remembers that, who posed as leader of the Democratic opposition, but actually had no base at all in the country. And here there's there's the opposition that actually won the 2024 election, and Trump will have nothing to do with it.
No,
Uh,
and even, he did make one comment about freedom for Venezuela, but his heart wasn't in that. I mean, what's interesting is they don't even play along anymore. The
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
in
it's
that
like,
press
okay,
conference, I actually did a count. There were 0 mention. Trump didn't use the word democracy once.
no,
He did use the word oil 27 times, which is kind of interesting.
yeah.
Um, but
Well, that's what it's about. I mean, it's clearly, but even then, I think, this is one of the things. How does the United States seize these resources? Which clearly Trump believes they can, or
yeah,
seems to think they can, but it doesn't change the basis of where these resources are. It would take American oil companies a long time to start pumping from them anyway
yeah,
to build up the new infrastructure. It's not clear what exactly beyond his idea that somehow we will control the resources. I mean, how they plan to make this work. I just don't get it.
yeah. So by the time this interview runs, I probably will have put this up on my Substack. But there's uh, something I didn't know, which is that we talk about how Venezuela has enormous oil reserves, and it turns out that the oil reserves tripled under Chavez. Not because there were actually any new discoveries or anything, but because they reclassified a bunch of, basically, crap oil
Yeah.
as reserves, and so this is, and the oil companies are not interested, so it's pretty basic.
That's, I mean, I've talked to some oil executives, and I don't want to say I know the industry really well, but they're very skeptical of this. Again, as you say, this is really heavy, dirty crude. It's expensive to refine, and particularly with the price of oil so low, the chance of having it be profitable in the short term is pretty small because this is not the oil you want. And the idea that with crude prices declining, people are going to throw billions into Venezuelan oil fields to try and pump out this oil is, I think, really quite skeptical. I mean, the oil companies seem to be playing along with the Trump administration because everyone's terrified of offending the Trump administration. But I'd be very surprised if we had major investment in the short term.
So we have, pretty strange, but we have, the regime change that wasn't a regime change, uh,
Mhm.
emperor's new regime change or something like that, and then, um, uh I don't know what more there is to say except that, as of the time we're having this conversation, there's been very little. The things that you and I are both saying are, I don't think that essentially, I don't think anyone reading the New York Times would have a clear sense that we just basically, um, left the same gang in power. And the only place I'm seeing clear reporting is in places like Bloomberg. The business news seems to be clear about the nature of the problem.
They're always better in some ways. The business report, they were really good on Trump sanctions on Russian oil. It was if you read a lot of the press, you'd think, oh, Trump was being tough on Russian oil. And then you would read the oil press and they'd go, actually, prices of crude are declining because the market doesn't believe these are going to make any real difference.
Yeah.
So that's often the case. You can find out a great deal in the more specialist press, which understands the economic behavior behind the actions than you can looking at what is being said. I mean, I think this is really worrying about how Trump has really cowed the press, and he can say any old, can I say batshit
Yeah.
stuff?
Yeah.
He can say any old thing about, oh, we're controlling things, and I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna do that. And he has no ability to necessarily do any of this. And yet it's repeated widely that, oh, the United States now will control Venezuela.
Yeah.
But that's simply based on the president of the United States saying he is going to do that. And that we allow these things to go, I think, unchallenged too much. And well, one thing that also particularly bugged me is now people are reframing the Monroe Doctrine as saying the United States believes it can always interfere in the Western Hemisphere whenever it wants. It was far more complex than that, and there's always been a debate about it. And yes, there have been parts of it like that, Theodore Roosevelt, but there was also Franklin Roosevelt and the Good Neighbor policy that openly rejected that. So the Monroe Doctrine was never what Trump says clearly it is, or the Donroe Doctrine, I guess is the way he called it the other day. But we seem to just have dumbed down everything to live in this Trumpite world where we just take what he says and said, okay, there must be something to that because the president of the USA says it.
Yeah. I mean, it's an amazing thing that we have this sort of crude, um, we're going to seize resources view of the world on the part of Trump. And, you know, it's which is well over a century out of date. I mean, it's sort of Norman Angel, The Great Illusion. This hasn't been the way the world worked since the Industrial Revolution got seriously um, underway, and yet here we are. And anyway, it's um, you've been writing about um, the uh, actually, several things to say about, but one of the things that you wrote about that I thought was really interesting lately, it's pre-Venezuela, but, you've been writing about how, um, people, and particularly Americans, misunderstand war in general. And you wanna talk about that a bit? Because I think it's a very
Yeah, I
interesting.
mean, this is exactly actually the Venezuelan intervention was almost a textbook case of what I have been trying to say, that Americans get excited by operations or battles. So we pull off. I mean, and the US military is actually brilliant at winning battles and pulling off operations.
Yeah,
There's probably no other military in the world that could have abducted Maduro as effectively as the US military did. And there's that is what the US military does well. It has an object, it usually blows it up or it seizes it and then goes home. The problem is that there's a huge disconnect between doing that and achieving your strategic goals or winning a war.
yeah,
That the United States didn't lose a battle by any standard in the Vietnam War. They won every battle in the Vietnam
yeah,
War. They won every engagement with the Taliban in Afghanistan. But they didn't win the wars because they were too almost obsessed with the engagement, with the operational brilliance to see what are we doing and how is this actually achieving our aims. And I think the U.S. way of war is just it's upside down. It does the granular really well, but it absolutely fails in looking at the bigger picture. And this is typical, and I think something that we're seeing in Venezuela. That what the U.S. always does is it downplays the important role of allies. That's hugely important. Working with other countries. In fact, I can tell you there is only one rule for an intervention that has any chance of success. The only way an intervention has any chance of success if the people on the ground are going to fight for you. If you have allies who are willing actually to fight, like say the Ukrainians, then you have a chance of success in an intervention. If you're going to do the fighting, if you're going to go into Afghanistan, you're going to go into Vietnam and infantilize the people who might support you, you're going to lose that war. But that's what the U.S. way of war does, is it infantilizes other countries, demeans them, says the U.S. can do everything, and then the U.S. ends up winning battle after battle after battle and then losing the war because they can't keep it going. And this could be something we're going to see in Venezuela if we keep seeing these kind of interventions. We don't actually have any
yeah.
support in Venezuela. We're alienating the Venezuelan opposition with our behavior, and we're alienating a lot of other countries in the region. I think these countries are looking around and saying, "What the heck? Who's going to support this?"
I mean, in a way, um, well, as you say, the U.S. Really, I mean, we have at least up till some potential conflict with China, we've had overwhelming superiority in armament, overwhelming. I think, as you've written, the U.S. can do logistics like
Yep.
nobody else can do, but that's even with all of at first, as you said recently, um, people don't pay enough attention to things like logistics because they look at U.S. wars, and the U.S. is completely on a different planet when it comes to that, and nobody else is. And but the but that doesn't translate into winning wars, and it's and and it again, sorry, Venezuela again. We've been in Iraq. We were desperate to find, we've sort of invented allies who didn't exist. And in
Yeah.
Venezuela, we actually had people who were desperate to have the U.S. as an ally, and were actually, and got blown off because because Trump was feeling peeved. It's just,
There's so much there, Paul. I mean, the logistics one, it's one of the things people forgot about logistics in war because the U.S. did it so well.
yeah,
The U.S. has the ability to pick up something and move it around the world very quickly with the kind of lift capacity that no other state does. So we forgot about it. When we looked at a Russian invasion of Ukraine, people simply assumed the Russians could do the logistics because no one had thought about logistics as a serious problem for a long time because the U.S. military had seemed to solve it. And actually, when we look at Russia and Ukraine now, we are seeing a logistic struggle. I mean, this war is being determined by logistic flows. Who can make things? Where can they send them? And they're operating in a much more real world than the U.S. did. The U.S. operated in what I would say this wargaming high school boy war, where you would fight the battle, assuming everything would get to the place for the battle. So, I mean, that is absolutely one of the key problems with the U.S. way of war. But then when we look on its hand, we look at it, we focus on the battle. What we have done also in the hemispheric way is assume no one else matters. So when we talk about this new Western Hemisphere obsession, the State Department even calls it our hemisphere, which is
yeah,
yeah, absolutely bonkers. What the United States is doing is saying we have no allies. We have even really no friends. We have our power, and our power alone will determine what we do. By the way, that's never worked out for the United States.
right.
Even the United States was founded through allies. You might say its diplomacy helped win the Civil War and helped the country survive. It triumphed in the First and Second World Wars because of allies. And now it seems to have this weird notion that it can go and do whatever it wants and no one will stop it because it hasn't thought about these things in realistic terms. It's just thought about them in this American echo chamber. But I do believe the country is heading for a very serious fall.
Yeah. The random thoughts. I ran across somebody who, one of these people who kind of was into the "we are the new Roman Empire" sort of thing, and who made the horrifying discovery that the secret of the Roman Empire, the secret of the rise of the Republic anyway, wasn't that the legions were the best troops on the planet. They might have been, but not that much better than other. But it was that Rome had genius for cultivating alliances, and
Yep.
so
And expanded citizenship.
that's right. They
You know, the series of people, what Rome did is it welcomed other people.
Yeah, that's right. They welcomed, at some point, they welcomed immigrants to Rome itself, and then they also made converted
Yep.
allies into citizens that just became the
They
uh,
expanded the citizenship first up and down Italy and then into Gaul. I mean,
yeah,
so that, Rome was not Rome. Um, it was actually a real multi-ethnic polity.
yeah,
By 50 AD, it was a huge area with citizenship that expanded all the way from the English Channel down into the Mediterranean.
yeah. Actually, Mary Beard's book, SPQR, is one of my favorite books of all time. She ends it, I guess, around sometime early third century, when
Hmm.
basically everybody became a citizen,
Yep.
uh, because they just kept on expanding it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and that gets another thing. How I, mean, I had no, and you might understand the politics of it. How anti-immigrant became so powerful when economically it's so disastrous.
Yeah.
And how did this? I mean, I didn't see this happening 10 years ago. I mean, I knew there were issues with immigration, and certain people felt scared. But I never thought it would become such an overriding concern that people would do things that could economically damage the country.
Yeah, yeah, um, question is actually how many are there? I mean, um, for what it's worth, polling shows the public opinion is, thermostatically swung relatively quite pro-immigrant again, and
Good.
it's to a large extent we're talking about the personal obsession of Trump and a few people around him, and it's
Mhm.
just. But anyway, um, you did. Sorry, my different questions I want to talk about are trampling on each other, but let me try and focus for a moment here. Um,
Mhm.
Actually, let's talk for a bit about Ukraine, and then I want to talk about the bigger picture. So, um, we've been through like a month ago. There was another spate of stories. So this is kind of a regular rhythm of unstoppable Russian juggernaut
Mhm.
stories in the press, and you've been pretty caustic about that.
I mean, all right. 2025.
Yeah,
Russia mobilized over 30,000 new troops a month. Right. So that's a lot of that's a big mobilization.
yeah,
They were generating 400,000 or so plus new troops,
you're right,
and they expended almost all of them. So I mean, if you're going to look at this year, the Russians probably lost what they generated
right.
in troop numbers, and they took zero point 0.8 of 1% of Ukraine.
Yeah,
At by any historical standard, we would be saying the Russian army is in a massive quagmire. And by the way, they're probably not going to be able to raise that number of troops this year, or they will struggle to raise that number of troops this year. So the trajectory of what the Russians are able to do is not a positive one. They were able to make advances because in certain areas because they do not care about their soldiers' lives. And they would able to go farm field to farm field, take advantage of bad weather, but this was never going to exploit. They were never going to break through because you can't build up forces near the front. You can't build up vehicles. You can't build up depots. So the idea that you might make a breakthrough and send tanks into it is just fanciful. It's not going to happen. So the Russians are stuck fighting this form of warfare. My own view is had Kamala Harris won, or a Biden policy continued, the Russians would actually be close to defeat.
yeah.
That that Trump
Sorry.
has saved them to a certain degree and provided them with a great deal of support and protection that the Biden administration would not have done, and would have put them in a much more difficult diplomatic military situation. But Russia's still there because partly they're now being protected by Trump, and allowed to fight the war that they want to fight with very few repercussions. But they're still not doing well by historical standards. They're in a disastrous situation, and they're
Yeah,
not
for
making
what
much
it's
of it.
worth, I mean, for viewers who may not have seen our earlier discussions, the business about depots, about reserves behind the front, is one of those
Mhm.
things that is really what's kind of revelatory to me. And I think I learned it from you that again, overrunning a position is one thing. Opening a gap in the lines, but you have to have stuff close at hand. You have to have armored divisions, whatever. So, Blitzkrieg is the armored divisions rush through the gap and carry out these grand envelopments and all of that. But in this drone age, you can't have supplies, you can't have reserves um, anywhere close to the front line, or they just get shattered. And so,
The big depots, the ones that you would want to support a major advance, are
yeah,
50 miles or so behind the lines.
yeah,
So they can't keep those anywhere near the front. These are the
yeah.
big ones.
Which means that by the time that they can be brought up, it's going. There's no chance of exploiting a breach. None of this stuff that has happened the way that war used to work works anymore.
And they have to fight to even get to the front line. So,
Right.
say the Russians find a hole in the line. By the way, the Ukrainians are adjusting to this war by taking people away from the front line,
Yeah.
which is why this is the American way of war, where I think they just get it a bit ass backwards. That you have people like John Bolton saying, "Oh, the Ukrainians need to draft all their young people and send them to the front line." No, the Ukrainians need to keep doing what they're doing, which is to reduce the number of troops in the front line, save their troops in an operational reserve, and let the Russians waste their own forces on the front line, because just being on the front line is incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
The chance of you being found and killed is really high. And what you want to do as little human fighting as possible and as much machine fighting as possible, because you're not going to deal with a breakthrough. The Russians aren't going to be able to send hundreds of tanks through a gap in the line, so you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
And that's adjusting to reality as opposed to our wargaming view of what war is.
Yeah. And what that means, I guess, in terms of practical stuff, is that um, it's not that Ukraine is winning exactly, but that the idea that they're going to fold up and collapse, even with U.S. aid cut off, seems to be all wrong. I mean, basically Trump has. I was just looking at the Ukraine aid tracker. Basically, the U.S. Cut off all aid in the summer.
It's gone.
Uh,
The U.S. is not providing any aid at all. They are selling very small amounts through Europe. So
Right.
the Europeans are paying full fare, in fact, probably inflated figures, to pass on some U.S. weaponry to Ukraine. But we're talking single-digit billions
Right.
when the Biden administration gave $140 billion. So what this is tiny amounts of specific one. And even then, there are reports that the Trump administration regularly slows down the supply, even of things the Europeans have purchased.
Yeah.
So they're trying to make it as difficult as possible without losing all leverage. The Trump administration wants to maintain some leverage over Ukraine and leverage over Europe. And that's why they're continuing these very small number of sales.
But well, okay. That I hadn't really thought of that. I was wondering why there was still some leaking through.
Because they want to force Ukraine and Europe to take a really bad deal.
Okay.
If they cut everything off, then they would have no leverage whatsoever. I mean, what the Trump and I actually think we underrate the Trump administration, because what they do is understand the psychology of the people in Europe who desperately want the U.S. to be what it was. They want the U.S. to be pro-Ukraine, anti-Russia, to support them. And so the Trump administration throws them crumbs every once in a while. Trump himself, oh yeah, I'm mad at Putin.
Yeah.
Oh yes, Ukraine is doing a little bit better. But these maintain their leverage. So when it comes time to make a deal, they can force them to take as bad a deal as possible. I think we saw that perfectly in October, November. In October and November, remember, this is when Trump did this bit of the public pivot to support Ukraine and said he was anti-Putin and all of that. But at the same time, that's when they worked out the 28-point deal with Russia. So
Right.
behind the scenes, they were working out they basically were taking a Russian plan and saying, okay, we're going to make this the U.S. plan. Whereas publicly, they were pretending to fall out with Putin. So I think that was the great example of how they're operating.
Yeah.
They know what they're doing, and they're taking advantage of, I think, very naive hopes in Europe that they might change their mind to maintain their leverage while protecting Putin. Because ultimately what they're doing is giving Putin the gift of time. If the Europeans and Ukrainians won't take a deal Putin wants, this allows Putin to continue the war knowing the U.S. isn't going to be his enemy, which provides him a great deal of freedom. So the U.S. is doing a real service to the Russians right now. I know Americans don't want to admit it, but that's the reality of the war.
Yeah. And it's always interesting to wonder why, what the motivation is. But
Money and actually long-term business relationships. I mean, Trump has been doing business with them since the 80s, I think.
yeah, I think
And
so.
I think in some ways that these are his people. He knows them. In the world where he trusts very few people, he knows they always come up with the money. God knows what else they might have on him. He
I
certainly seems to react to their. I always thought it was interesting last week, the reaction when Putin just told him this nonsense story that the Ukrainians had attacked his palace.
yeah.
And what Trump does is doesn't question it. He doesn't go to U.S. intelligence and go, is this true? At the next press conference, he goes, the Ukrainians attacked Putin and I'm angry. How
Yeah.
could they do this? I'm really upset. And it just showed how the Russians really control his thought and how it was an emotional reaction to the idea that the Ukrainians might attack Putin.
Yeah,
And
that's
that
right.
was unfiltered.
Something actually sincere. This was Trump really having feelings. And it's funny because he doesn't seem to have empathy for very many people, but he does seem to have a lot of empathy for Putin, which is always just kind of mind-boggling.
It's fear. Yeah, it's fear, and he seems to crave his affection,
Yeah.
which is a weird. I don't understand narcissists, to that degree. I hope, but as a narcissist, you're not supposed to fully crave that. But maybe every narcissist has their Putin. The one person they need to prove that they are the greatest person in the world, and Trump needs Putin to do that to convince himself of that.
Yeah. We're gonna put this up here. I actually met Putin
Hmm.
sometime before the first invasion of Ukraine. It was a conference in Yaroslavl. I shared a stage with him, and I had a
Hmm.
terrible cold. And despite all the medication, I was coughing, and Putin made fun of my cough. Nasty little man. Anyway, um, but
Of course,
so
now he'd probably have you shot, Paul, for
oh
getting him
sure.
sick.
But yeah, the compromat story that the Russians have something on him. Just have to wonder given what everybody already knows about Trump, how could this matter? So I think it has to be something more about emotional.
Yeah.
Uh, that Putin is his emotional support animal or something like that. And yeah, so um, but just generally the so I guess you've been writing about this. I guess a lot of us have been thinking it. Somehow or other, this whole vision. Oh, sorry. I'm going to backtrack for a second and just say, um, the point is the United States cut off aid,
Yep.
except for this trickle, which is, as you say, for leverage. The uh, so the Ukrainians have been fighting naked in that sense
Mhm.
since last summer at least, um, and yet as you say, this tiny. If you look at a map, the nothing has moved significantly. So this. You do wonder what I've seen speculation or even
Mhm.
some alleged reporting that Putin is also being fed
Mhm.
misinformation by his. He's being told about battlefield triumphs that exist only in only for his consumption.
He seems to be being told a few things. He's being told outright lies that the Russians control parts of the line they don't. And we know that because he came out and claimed, we have taken Kupiansk.
Oh, that's right.
This Yeah, and there was no doubt about it. He had been reported. He said, "Yes, the Russian, Kupiansk is now ours. Pokrovsk is now ours." And no head. And then the next thing we know, Zelensky's actually in Kupiansk, and the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back from Kupiansk. And indeed, the Russians still haven't taken all of Pokrovsk. I mean, that's more in the balance after being fought over for a year and a half. So clearly, Putin is being told geographically things that are not true, that the Russian army is taking areas they have not taken, which is not uncommon for dictators. This is often what dictators are told, and they believe it. The second thing is he seems to be told the Ukrainian army is on its last legs. That is a regular theme of what he says. Ukrainians are going to crack
Yeah.
soon. And that certainly, I think, is the kind of thing we can assume he is being told, because that's why his military leaders could say, aha, give me more, they're about to go. They're about to crack, because the opposite is something they don't want to face, which means they're throwing away their own soldiers and actually not getting a lot for it. So the system's probably providing Putin with really slanted information, but of course he wants to be fed that information.
That's for what it's worth, by the way, viewers who don't obsessively follow this stuff may not know about Kupiansk, which is one of those, it's a real clear-cut battlefield. Victories are hard to find here, but this is a clear-cut battlefield victory for Ukraine. The
Yep.
Russians seized part of it. The Ukrainians, so far as we use terminology that talks as if there
Mm.
were clear battle lines, and it doesn't actually make sense anymore. But effectively, the Ukrainians cut off the Russian force there and destroyed it. Wait, did Zelensky actually visit Kupiansk?
He visited. I mean, how they did it is really. I've been talking with Ukrainian officers, and one in particular sort of talked me through what they do is extraordinary. It shows you how the battlefield works. The Ukrainians operate with very few soldiers, because the more soldiers you have, it just means the more targets you're putting
Right.
out. So the way they actually were able to push the Russians back from Kupiansk was by having very precise intelligence with very small numbers of troops who could operate very quickly. So honestly, they could say, for the next hour, we don't see any drones in this area, which means you now have to get moving right away
Right.
and get from this point to this house. They have to know exactly where you are going to end up
That's right.
when the drones come back, when the Russian drones are back. And therefore, these have to be good troops. They have to be really experienced troops who could then follow that order. And they have to, by the way, be able to tell those troops exactly what's coming up, because one Russian soldier they haven't identified can ruin the entire operation. So how the Ukrainians did it was by being very trained, very precise, and being able to sort of do these exact maneuvers. Something the Russians can't do. And the Russians are doing the opposite. They're just throwing humans at the problem and hoping it takes care of itself. The Ukrainians are trying to compensate. But the fact that the Ukrainians could do that is, I think, a sign that they are adapting and still have by far the more adaptive and resilient military.
That's yeah. It's not okay. Um, Kind of brings me to another topic I want to talk about, which is the role of intelligence. And the again, as you said, when Putin claimed that his house had been attacked, Trump rushed. Apparently, didn't ask the CIA or the NSA. What
Mhm.
what's the truth here? And in general, I mean, this is intelligence is one of those things. Certainly, kind of remote signals intelligence is something that the U.S. and its allies used to be supreme at, right? That was what
Mm.
um, Bletchley House and all of that, the Bletchley Park, right?
Well, what we seem to have learned about intelligence is that the U.S. is great at collecting it and not great at analyzing it.
Yeah,
So they have this extraordinary collection system that
right,
they can go around the world and listen in on most conversations, and that they can gather intelligence incredibly well. So they were, by the way, they were able to. They knew Putin was going to invade Ukraine in
right.
February 2022. They knew they collected that. Where they fail is in the analysis of what they do with that information. Well, what does it mean that we have found out all of this? But if their analysis says, "Oh, Kyiv is going to fall in a week," or as we've just seen in Venezuela, their analysis was, "Oh, let's work with the Madurists." That actually was supposedly the U.S. analysis, intelligence analysis, that actually the best people to work with is Maduro's own regime. Then you got to say we have a real analytical problem in our intelligence agencies. Um, I mean, what the atmosphere must be like there too, with Tulsi Gabbard as the director of national intelligence. It's got to be deteriorating, and if anything, getting worse from a dangerously bad base. But the U.S. is an intelligence superpower and an intelligence failure at the same time.
And then you layer on top of that a commander in chief and the people around him who don't want to know.
Yep.
Uh, that don't ask, don't. Um, I don't know if you looked at the pictures. I guess Trump himself posted pictures from the war room at Mar-a-Lago for the Venezuela operation.
Oh
Uh,
God, I miss those.
oh, you missed a great scene because you can see they set up the secure war room, which actually just has curtains around it. It's not even a room.
Hmm.
But what's really amazing is that behind the people there, you can see a big computer screen, which actually has Twitter on it, with a search for Venezuela, and so they have the world's most powerful intelligence gathering system, and they're basically looking at Twitter or X, I guess. It's an amazing thing, but I guess it comes to if you don't want to know, then it doesn't matter how much people could tell you because you don't want to know.
Or you don't care what reality is, you just care how Twitter's discussing it. And that could also be what's going on. Yeah. Trump's reality isn't reality. It's whatever social media says it is, or whatever he tells social media that it is.
Yeah, and the social
So,
media themselves are not reality because it's bots and Russians and Nigerians.
I mean, how many follow? I mean, that really came home to me when Trump won the 2024 election. And then there was that purge of Russian bots
Yeah,
as soon as the election was over. I lost, I mean, like 15,000 Twitter followers.
I you know I I didn't even count, but I had pretty much given up on Twitter. Which I had 2 million followers.
Oh
Uh,
my God.
and the but it became toxic. You couldn't. I had to shut down replies entirely because they would be overrun, and then um, somebody, according to the information I got, my account got hijacked by someone in Saratov, Russia, and I haven't even tried to get it back. I don't want to
Okay.
deal with Musk and all of that. So I've been shut out. Whoever hijacked it put up one post pro crypto, and then deleted it, and the account has been silent ever since. And so if anybody wants, I'm not doing enough. I should be on Blue Sky more, but basically the Substack is where you're going to hear me now.
Yeah, I mean, Substack, I have to say, it's just nice not to have. There are the occasional Russian bots, but just not that many.
There's a pretty good yeah. For one, yeah, the commenting so far, I get typically a couple
Hmm.
readers report comments that don't look right, but it's only one or two per a day, and so far so good. I mean, God knows. I had a conversation last week with somebody who, we all kind of worried because Mark Andreessen's investment company has a large stake in Substack, and we never know whether
Hmm.
it's when it gets enshittified. Maybe we should say when, not if, but not yet anyway. Uh,
God, I hope not.
yeah, well, I think eh, part of the reason I'm talking too much, but part of the reason to build a base is so that you can actually pick it up and leave
Yeah.
if necessary. So, um, U.S. role in the world. So we're actually imagine. I mean, we kind of know who's in charge.
Mhm.
Can the U.S. ever get back to where it was?
No, no, it cannot. I mean, basically, where it was the leader of an alliance system and actually the guarantor of the rules based order, which was flawed,
Right.
entirely flawed. I
Yeah.
understand that. But it was a rules based order where there were international courts and there were attempts to do trade organizations and all of that. I think that's done because the US, first of all, we don't even know if the US wants to go back.
Yeah.
I think that's an important thing. We don't know that the U.S. has any stomach to go back. But even if it did, the world's moving on right now. So that people aren't listening to the U.S. They certainly are not going to trust the U. I mean, I think the Americans thought the world might have disliked them, but actually the reality is the world really, really relied on the U.S. more than Americans understood. Europeans, in many ways, couldn't live without the U.S.
Yeah.
They had become utterly reliant on the US to do their strategic thinking. Same with Japan, Taiwan. Many of these states were completely emotionally and strategically reliant on the US. That's gone because they've suddenly realized by doing that, they put themselves in a great deal of danger. So the US can't wake up in 3 years and go, yeah, I'm sorry, bad moment, let's go back to the way it was. That's just not going to happen. And I don't see how you make these international organizations work again. And how is anyone going to do the WTO now? Seriously, look at the WTO.
Yeah, I mean, which is up my alley, and the trading system, even pre-WTO, is one of the great successes of international cooperation. Flawed as always, and it was kind of a funny system, which uh, didn't necessarily ensure good policies, but we did have, we had set rules, and the rules really mattered. I mean, it
Yep.
was, this wasn't a gloss. Again, I'm talking for myself here. I spent 1 year in government, uh, as a sub-political level in the Reagan administration, although I actually wrote the 1983 economic report to the president. But anyway, but I'd be in meetings where some proposal would come up, and the guy from the U.S. Trade Representative's office would say, "That would be GATT illegal." The GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and
Yep.
Trade, which is the underlying framework, and that was it. Even the Reagan administration did not do things that were in clear violation of the international trading rules, and it's gone now. And
It's absolutely done. And how do you can't put that back together, right?
yeah, wow. Well, give us another uh, 30, 40 years, we might be able to. But yeah, it's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
So, any concluding thoughts?
Concluding thoughts.
It's
Oh boy. I mean, uh, I still the big concluding thought is that the U.S. is weakening itself. I think that's the overriding thing. I don't get it, because it's all this talk about American strength and American power, but it seems to be almost deliberately scaled to do the opposite. That and is it stupidity? Is it deliberate? I don't know. But the U.S. is doing a great deal of damage to itself, and I don't see any way to stop it in the short term.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's a upbeat concluding note for our conversation. Thanks so much for talking to me.
Thanks a lot, Paul.